All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. So thank you for joining us today. Welcome. It's such a great day, Constitution Day. We're happy to be coming to you live from the National Constitution Center. We're ready to answer all of your questions. So in the meantime, people are telling us where they're from. I see Pam from Indiana. So please tell us where you're joining us from today. We're so excited to see you and to answer your questions. Again, we're going to start in about 2 minutes. We have a hello from Matthew. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Doors are locked.
We've got hello, Anthony. Janelle and Jeanette, Girl Scouts from North Central Alabama. My goodness, hello, welcome. So hi, everybody. My name is Jenna. I am the Senior Manager at the National Constitution Center, and we are going to be live from our exhibits in just a minute, where I'm waiting for them to patch into the Zoom call. But in the meantime, welcome and happy Constitution Day. We're so happy to have you live with us, coming in from all over the country. We've had people from Indiana, Alabama. This is so great. Tell us hello in the chat box. Tell us, where you're from. Happy Constitution Day, and also send us any questions. I am happy and ready to answer all of your questions here in our chat box. All right, we got Rochester, New York. Tennessee, Gray from Tennessee. Hello. Michigan. Hello, Rose. All right, does anybody have any questions that they... All right, Matthew is asking, is this a part of our grade? That's up to your teacher. I don't give a grade. All right, we're just still waiting for our friends to patch in from the exhibits upstairs here at the Constitution Center. In the meantime, we're saying hello to everybody in the chat box. We have Whitney from Washington State, Rose from Watsonville, Lainey from West Virginia. Hi, Lainey. Kristen from Utah. Hi, Kristen. Happy Constitution Day, everyone. Okay, if you guys want to start asking questions, I love seeing, but if you have any questions about Constitution Day, in fact, I think I'm going to start off by asking you a question. Today is Constitution Day, September 17th, but what year was the Constitution signed? How old is the Constitution turning today? That's a great way to get us started. Does anybody know what year the Constitution was signed? Tell us in the chat box over here. 233 years, 1787. Very good, Kristen. 1787. Matthew got that one. Gray got that one. So 1787, that was 11 years after the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution was signed. Very good. I also have a list of some of our frequently asked questions. So I think I'm going to ask you some of those as well. So obviously, what is the Constitution? Can everybody tell me what the Constitution is? This is a big word. We talk about it all the time, but I told you I wasn't giving out grades. I didn't say I wasn't going to be quizzing you. So what is the Constitution? It's a little hard to define, but tell me what it does. Anybody have that one? The supreme law of the U.S., very good. So what the Constitution does is it sets up our system of government. So my class says it's laws. Yeah, it is. It's a series of laws. It also sets up the different branches of government, and then the amendments protect a lot of our rights and our freedoms. And so these are all great answers. Very good. Document of laws. It is all of those things and more. So very good. I'd love to take your questions. If you guys have any questions for the Constitution Center staff, we are here. So let us know. In the meantime, let me see if I can find another frequently asked question from our stable of Constitution Day questions that I have here. All right, who wrote the Bill of Rights? That's a really interesting one. Okay, well, and while you guys are pondering that one, someone's asking me what are the statues in the background. This is Signers Hall. This is our recreation of September 17th, 1787. So it is the signers of the Constitution are the statues. So people like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, James Madison are all in this room, Alexander Hamilton. So that's where we are. That's an exhibit here at the National Constitution Center. We did a live, I'm actually not actually there. This is a Zoom background, but we did a live Q&A from there a little earlier today, so you can check out that video on YouTube and a great tour of that video. All right. Randolph from Virginia, very good. He had a lot to say about the Constitution, but he did not write the Bill of Rights. Anybody figure that one out yet? All right, in the meantime, we have a question about how many hours did the writers spend working on the document? You know, I don't think I have a full time on that, but I can tell you that it went from May 25th to September 17th of the year 1787. So that's how many months it was. But in terms of total hours, like, clocked, I don't know that one. That's a good one. That stumped me. How many people were there? Okay, well, 55 people came and went from the Constitutional Convention over the course of the summer. So there were 55 total delegates. Not everybody stayed straight through till September. They weren't all there at the same time. So at the signing of the Constitution, there was 41 people, 39, well, there was 41 people at the signing. We have John Dickinson in the room. He wasn't actually there, but his friend signed his name for him. So we have 39 signers and 3 dissenters at the Constitutional Convention. What happened between 1776 and 1787? Great question. We did have a government. It was under the Articles of Confederation. So we won the Revolutionary War, set up a brand new government under the Articles of Confederation, and it was good for a while, but then it was really hard to get stuff done. You needed unanimous consent from all of the states. And as you guys probably know, if you have friends, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, it's hard to do anything unanimously to get everybody to agree. So imagine trying to run a government that way. So they said, we probably need to make some adjustments to the government. That's why they met in Philadelphia in 1787, was to look at the Articles of Confederation. So that's a great question. All right. Whitney wants to know why the Constitution is so special, and I think that's a great question, and I think it's different for every single person. It's really special to me because I know that, like, I have rights and freedoms, and I know that the government has all these checks and balances, and it's a really unique and well thought out form of government, and I really appreciate that. But I think it means something different to everybody else. So why don't you tell me why you think the Constitution is so special? I'll read out some of those answers as they come in. So from Heidi, did the Sons of Liberty sign the Constitution? So I don't know about that one. I know that like I said, we have 39 signers of the Constitution. They include some really famous names: Ben Franklin, George Washington. I think some of them might have been on the Sons of Liberty, but I don't know for certain. I don't know which ones are which. So that's a good question. You've stumped me. I always like to say when people have stumped me. Okay, questions are coming in nice and fast now. So let me take a look. Okay, well, we have some responses to why we think it's special. Oh, it's coming in really fast now. All right, Kristen, it's special because although it was written 233 years ago, it's so applicable and helpful in our today. I think that's true. The fact that it's still all right, any other questions? I'm looking. And I think we're coming live from the exhibit. Let's give it one more minute. Okay, Lisa says the Constitution is special because it shows we're united.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you. Hello, we can't see you yet.
Can't see us yet. Hold on. Trying.
All right, how many years ago? I'm assuming that's how many years ago was it signed? That's 233 years today we signed the Constitution. How were the signers chosen? Why not more or less? Well, the signers were chosen by their individual states. So we had a convention, we asked the states to send representatives. So there were different sizes for different state delegations. Pennsylvania was the biggest because we were already here. They didn't have far to go. They could just stay home and come to the convention every day. But, states that needed to come, people who were coming from states that needed to be further, that was slightly smaller delegations. Rhode Island didn't actually send anybody at all. So they were invited, they just didn't come. So that's why, but it was each state individually chose who to send from their state. Why did they do it in Philadelphia? That's a great question. I was always under the impression that Pennsylvania is the keystone state, because a keystone in a doorway is that center stone. And if you think about the United States in 1787, Pennsylvania was right in the middle. So people from Georgia, people from up in New Hampshire, they could all meet in the middle in Pennsylvania in Philadelphia's Independence Hall. That's a great question. Why did they do it in Philadelphia? Any other questions? All right, another question from me then. How many amendments are there on the US Constitution? Do you guys know that one? Wow, those came in really fast. 27, very good. So an amendment is a change to the Constitution. We had this question earlier. The 27th Amendment, the most recent change to the Constitution, was ratified in the 1990s, but it was written in the 1700s with the rest of the Bill of Rights, and it took over 200 years to get ratified. So that's a really interesting little fun fact. Do you have a favorite amendment? That's a great question. What's your favorite amendment? Does anybody have one? All right, there's Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Oh, we can't hear you yet.
There's just so much to do in here, so much to see. I guess I lost track of time, but happy Constitution Day to you. Hope everyone's doing well.
Happy Constitution Day. Yeah, we've had lots of great, questions coming in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the exhibits that you're in, and hopefully we'll get some more questions and we can get right to them.
Of course. So welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin. I'm a museum educator here at the National Constitution Center. Today, I'm here in our main exhibit, which sort of begins looking at the Constitution. Today is Constitution Day. And if you can see over my shoulder, we have the preamble to the Constitution. So we sort of begin looking at that. But then we make our way really through all of American history. We begin in 1765 in colonial America, even before the Constitution was signed. And we really make our way all the way up to the present day. So no matter what part of American history you're interested in or you want to study about, we're going to have something for you here in this exhibit space.
All right, Kevin, I think we lost your video. Can you check your connections?
One moment.
Sorry about this, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us during our technical difficulties. There you are.
It randomly muted itself.
It's 1787. I'm still trying to figure out this technology thing.
Yeah, it's definitely it's come a long way. We're all new on Zoom. This is definitely a different kind of Constitution Day for us, certainly. All right, so Kevin, we were just talking about what our favorite amendments are. Do you have a favorite amendment?
Oh, I wouldn't necessarily say I have a favorite. I would say, probably when we're talking about, Constitution Day, the first 10 together, the Bill of Rights is sort of looped together. They were all passed at the same time. In 1791, they were ratified. I would say probably the first. That certainly has sort of the most freedom sort of packed into it, I would say. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to assembly, right to petition, all sorts of freedoms packed into the First Amendment. But really sort of all sorts. I wouldn't necessarily have a favorite. They're all very important in their own way. And even though they weren't part of the original Constitution that was signed in 1787, they're just as important a part of the Constitution today.
Yeah. So we just got a great question that I want to take. Can you change an amendment after it's been ratified? And that's happened before, hasn't it?
It has, yes. So we've had one time that we passed an amendment and then decided, well, maybe that didn't quite work out the way that we thought. And that was the 18th Amendment, which took effect in 1919. And that amendment sought to regulate and actually prohibit the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating beverages. And it was decided after about 12 years that this amendment wasn't really working the way that people thought it would. And it was actually creating more problems than it solved. But to change an existing amendment would require another amendment. So in 1933, we passed the 21st Amendment, which essentially says that we are repealing the 18th Amendment. So yes, you can change amendments, but to do so, that would require a whole nother amendment.
All right, so it's an election year. So I know that one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what's the deal with the Electoral College? So can we explain a little bit about the Electoral College, just so everybody knows going into this election, how that works?
Sure, absolutely. So many people think that when we have election day in early November, that we, the people, are voting directly for the President of the United States. Well, not quite. What we're sort of doing is voting for the people who will then vote for the President of the United States. So the Electoral College was set up, it's a system of electors, and it's proportionate to the number of representatives in Congress and the Senate that each state has. So for instance, in Pennsylvania, we have 18 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. So that equals 20 representatives. So we have 20 electoral votes. So when if you're from Pennsylvania, we all cast our ballots. And then whoever wins the popular vote in Pennsylvania, that party will get to send their electors to then cast ballots. Some states have different rules about whether it's winner take all or a proportional amount of electors go to each party. But each state will send a certain number of electors, and larger states will have more electors. And each state will send their number of electors, and that is how we will officially vote for president. So we have 538 total electoral votes that are up for grabs in a presidential election. That comes from the total number of senators and congressmen from all of the 50 states, plus 3 electoral votes for DC, totaling 538. If you divide that in half and add 1, that'll give us the magic number of 270. So for all of us tuning in on election night, 270 is the magic number. If you're a presidential candidate, you need to get 270 votes to win the presidency.
Very helpful information. Thanks, Kev. Okay, here's one about our friends in Signers Hall. Did all the constitutional signers go to college? Tell us a little bit about their backgrounds. What kind of guys do we have at the Constitutional Convention?
Okay, so of the men that we have at the Constitutional Convention, the majority of them were lawyers who had been educated, but education wasn't quite as formal as we think of today. So it wasn't the traditional, go through high school, go through college, maybe even go on to law school. Back then, let's say for the majority of them, they might have been lawyers, you didn't necessarily have formal legal training where you would go through and then pass a bar exam. More often than not, let's say you were training to be a lawyer, you would study under somebody. So one of the men who actually worked on the Constitution but wasn't around for signing day, so he's not in Signers Hall, is a guy named George Witt. And he's considered sort of America's first law professor, but he wasn't teaching classes the way that your professors might today. He would have students who might study under him. And some of Witt's students involved a guy named Thomas Jefferson, a guy named John Marshall, and a guy named Henry Clay, some pretty prominent figures. But some of our other more famous figures, like George Washington, never attended college. So certainly a number of our founding fathers did attend college, but it certainly wasn't a prerequisite for how to write up a Constitution.
Yeah. So speaking of George Washington, I'm going to go to another one of our frequently asked questions. George Washington and the cherry tree. Can we talk about whether that's true, whether it's not true, and also like these myths surrounding the founding figures a little bit, because there's a lot of them.
Sure, absolutely. There's all sorts of stories about George Washington, whether it would be him sitting around and cracking a walnut in between two fingers, or whether he was skipping a silver dollar across the Rappahannock River, and they didn't actually have dollars back then, they used pounds. Or the story of the cherry tree, where Washington supposedly chopped down a cherry tree, but then when confronted about it, because he was so honest, where he could have lied to get out of it, he wasn't able to do so. We don't really think that these stories are actually true, but there's so many stories about these founding fathers that are told that even if they didn't happen, they may have been something that they would have done. They help to sort of illustrate the character of these founding fathers. Certainly Washington was a very honest man, and in fact, he was such a stickler for rules that when he was a young man, he wrote down and copied rules were called rules for civility and decent behavior. And these included making sure that you didn't sneeze at the dinner table, which is certainly important today, making sure that you sat up straight, and all these different rules and different behaviors to make sure that he was always behaving a proper gentleman. So maybe if George Washington didn't exactly chop down the cherry tree and then be honest about it afterward, that may have been something that, if he had done that, he probably would have been honest about it, even if it didn't actually happen.
Yeah. So you are in our Story of We the People exhibit. That's where we house a lot of our artifacts. It's not actually open right now to the public, so a lot of people can't see some of these cool artifacts. Do you have a favorite artifact in our exhibit?
I do. So this exhibit covers from the colonial times all the way up through around the present day. And sort of right around the middle of that, we have our alcove from the Civil War. Now, most of our artifacts from the Civil War have been brought downstairs. We have our feature exhibit on Civil War and Reconstruction, which is open today. You can see that. But one of the things that we do have up here still is an autograph book from Gettysburg on the day that Abraham Lincoln signed the Gettysburg Address. And it's signed by Abraham Lincoln, his Secretary of State, William Seward. And buried among the lower signatures there is a general named Abner Doubleday, who often traveled with President Lincoln. And for any baseball fans we have out there, Abner Doubleday was later falsely given credit for having invented baseball. So that's probably my favorite artifact that we have, but there's all sorts of artifacts from different time periods throughout this exhibit.
Yeah, we had some questions earlier about preserving artifacts, and that's a great example because that artifact itself is in a very it's not even lit. You have to push the little button to be able to light it up. So that's one way that we really preserve that and take good care of the artifacts and documents that are in our care. All right. We're still waiting for some questions. You guys ask us questions, or we're going to start asking you questions. I know we want to know who's your favorite figure from American history. It doesn't have to be a constitutional signer. We've had some really inspiring people from all throughout American history. So Kev, I'm going to ask you to get us started on that, and hopefully we can have some chat, some answers in our chat box too from our friends joining us. Who's your favorite figure from American history?
Well, probably, I'm a big presidential history buff. So one of my favorite figures is a president, and it's Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president. And the reason being, I just find him so fascinating. He was so interested in so many different things, much the way that Benjamin Franklin was. By the time Theodore Roosevelt was in his early 20s, he'd already published a book on the naval history of the War of 1812. He went west and spent some time out in the Dakota Territory trying to be a farmer. He was the first president to fly in an automobile, dive in a submarine, and drive in an automobile. I'm going to say fly in an automobile. Fly in an airplane, drive in an automobile, and dive in a submarine. So this guy was really into all sorts of different, whatever inventions were coming out. He was a speed reader. He could read usually a book a day, even while he was president. And he probably loved being president more than anyone else. Other presidents, they finished the job, and George Washington, for example, was certainly ready for retirement after his 2 terms. Theodore Roosevelt loved the presidency. Big family, all sorts of animals in the White House. So certainly the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt is a very interesting one that I happen to be particularly fond of.
Thanks. And we're getting great responses in our chat box. Abe Lincoln, Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson are all there. Janelle says Dr. King, which is a great choice. Dr. King is featured in our exhibits. We have some artifacts related to the civil rights movement. And I think he's a perfect example of how you don't need to be president or an elected figure to influence the Constitution. Right, Kev?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Some people, whether it's Dr. Franklin, Dr. King, Alexander Hamilton, there's a lot of famous figures that, even though they never ascended to the office of the presidency, they're still very important in helping to change the Constitution. And bringing up the subject of Dr. King, we're talking about the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution. And Dr. Martin Luther King's perhaps most famous moment is in Washington, D.C. in August of 1963, where he gives his famous speech that our viewers may have heard of, the I Have a Dream speech. And we were talking earlier about the rights in the First Amendment. And you think about all those freedoms that we have, Dr. King's, I Have a Dream speech. We've seen footage of that because the press was there, and he was speaking to hundreds of thousands of people who had assembled in Washington, D.C. to petition the government. So that famous speech is perhaps one of the best moments of all the different freedoms of the First Amendment coming together to help make that moment possible. So even though he wasn't president of the United States, certainly Martin Luther King had a dramatic impact on our American history and constitutional history.
Yeah, that's the one thing I love about the First Amendment is that you have those rights to express yourself, but you can also use them as tools to gain other rights. That's a really cool amendment. I love it. Question from Mike. This is a great one. Who are some, other figures from American history that we might not have read about in our history books? Who are some of your favorite, lesser known figures from history?
Oh, goodness. Let's see.
That's a great question. Yeah, I have to think about that one for a minute.
Well, I'll tell you one of my personal favorites that isn't as well known. Back in the Revolutionary War period, there was a guy named Dr. Joseph Warren, and he was the one who actually sent Paul Revere on his famous ride. And Warren, in those early years, the no taxation without representation, he was sort of one of those ones in Boston who sort of goes unnoticed. But he was one of the ones really sort of at the center of things in the early years of the Revolution and trying to sort of stir up momentum for rebelling against the British government. So I would say he's one that sort of goes unknown. I'm trying to think of some others that come to mind. There's so many important figures. I would say recently, our brand new exhibit that just opened, the 19th Amendment, How Women Won the Vote. And we have all sorts of famous suffragists that we cover there. People remember perhaps Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony. But there was another woman named Lucy Stone, sort of the third of these top three leaders of the movement. And she sort of goes under the radar a little bit. But she is the founder of the American Women's Suffrage Association and one of the leaders of the movement and sort of that first generation of suffragists. So I sort of am interested in her because she's not quite as well known as some of the others.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about our Civil War and Reconstruction exhibit, which is open downstairs from you, upstairs from me. But we also have another brand new exhibit, which is the 19th Amendment exhibit. So tell us a little bit about the 19th Amendment, because that's turning 100 this year. So, that's, again, one of my favorite amendments, as you can probably imagine.
Right. So we opened this exhibit on August 26th, which was the exact 100-year anniversary of when the 19th Amendment was passed into law, finally giving women the right to vote. So this is our brand new exhibit, and we sort of divide it into three sections. The first one begins really around 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention that occurs in Seneca Falls, New York. And it sort of goes from that first convention and the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after the Declaration of Independence, but tweaked a little bit to make sure we remember that all men and women are created equal. It goes from 1848 up until about the end of Reconstruction. And then from there, we're introduced to a whole new generation of suffragists with more sort of in-your-face tactics, including picketing in front of the White House to help make sure that the vote gets passed. That goes up through about the 19-teens. And then the last part of our exhibit goes from sort of those last 3 years, from 1917 until 1920, where we really focus on the fight to get this amendment passed through Congress and then ratified in each of the states. And this battle would culminate with one very close vote in Tennessee, and one particularly young delegate who sought the advice of his mother before he made his vote. So we do encourage you to come to the Constitution Center and check out that exhibit as soon as you get the chance.
Yeah, and we feature one of my favorite people that I hope you've heard about, but Frances Harper is really featured in that exhibit. And you know, being from Philadelphia, we've really been celebrating her this year, and so she's a good one to learn about. A poet and orator, really fought for abolition, fought for women's suffrage. So some fantastic figures. People are also sending more of their favorite figures from history. Aaron Burr is in there. That's a fun. Aaron Burr has a lot of influence on American history. Obviously, he had that famous duel with Hamilton, but he also, I believe, he introduced Dolly and James Madison. So definitely had an impact on our founding generation. I think there's also some famous figures in Signers Hall that maybe people don't talk about as much. My favorite, we talked about him again earlier in the earlier session, is Gouverneur Morris.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And Gouverneur's one, people see his name and they think, oh, that's Governor Morris. But that was actually his name, Gouverneur, although he did once run for governor of New York. If he had won, he would have been Governor Gouverneur, which would have been outstanding. But even though Morris...
That would have been fun. So again, tell us any of your questions. Keep them coming. Tell us your favorite figures, people we want to talk about. You know, Kim, I don't know. I'm trying to think of some of the other, most common questions we get. A lot of people just want to know the difference between the Declaration and the Constitution, why it took so long, because they both happened at the same place here in Philadelphia. Some of the same figures involved, so what was going on? We had the question earlier was what was going on in that time between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So that was one that came up earlier that I think we could dive into a little bit.
Okay, yes. So of course the Declaration of Independence is 1776. And then, yes, we've declared independence, but the war is still going on. And, we don't really complete the revolution. Yes, you throw off the old system of government, but now we need to build up a new system of government. So if we're not going to be governed by England, we're going to have to do it ourselves. But we need our own rules. So the first attempt of America to govern itself was the Articles of Confederation, 1777. And this is a loose treaty, really, amongst the states. And they agree to basically back each other in times of war. But they have their own militias. They have their own diplomats going to foreign nations. They have their own currency. So imagine if you have $20 of Pennsylvania money and you go right across the river to New Jersey, your $20 might only be worth $15. So there's all sorts of problems with the Articles of Confederation. And perhaps one of the biggest problems was that if you wanted to make any change in law, it required unanimous consent amongst all of the states. So if you imagine if you're with your classroom or your family, trying to get everybody to agree on one thing is pretty difficult to do. So by the time we get to 1787, everyone is in agreement that the articles really aren't quite working as well as we'd like. So the convention meets in 1787, the same place as the Declaration, but this time it's a different task. They're not throwing off the old system as they were with the Declaration of Independence. Now it's talking about, how do we figure out the best way to govern ourselves? Are we just going to tweak the Articles of Confederation, as some people wanted to do, just make smaller changes? Or are we going to throw them out entirely and start from scratch and come up with a whole new system of government? And of course, that's ultimately what ends up happening.
So we have a great question that just came in about George Washington. And before I let you answer it, I am going to say, Mike, this question about George Washington is great because we have Alexis Coe, who has written a recent biography about George Washington. She's one of the few women to write biographies on George Washington. She's going to be joining us live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with Jeff Rosen. So definitely we're going to get into Washington and Washington's role at the convention. But Mike is asking, wasn't Washington ready to retire by the time he got to the Constitutional Convention? His military career was over. He wanted to go home. What drew him back to politics and going to the Constitutional Convention?
Sure, Washington was ready to retire years before, but he always kept being brought back because of a sense of duty. Washington would have probably liked nothing more than to spend time on his farm at Mount Vernon. But after he retires from the Army in 1783, and he's ready to relax as a country gentleman, there's talk about a new constitutional convention or meeting of delegates. And Washington's not immediately sure if he wants to go. And in fact, he doesn't go to the one in 1786. They tried to have a convention in Annapolis, but because Washington wasn't going, most people felt it really wasn't all that important. So there were only about 5 states that sent delegates. Only about 12 people showed up. And as you can imagine, nothing really important got done. So by the time we're getting around to the new convention in Philadelphia, people like James Madison know that if this constitutional convention is going to be taken seriously, then George Washington needs to come. Because if Washington comes, then other people will pay attention. So yes, Washington would probably much rather stay at home, but he's got this sense of duty that, my work is maybe not quite done yet. So he does, in fact, agree to attend the Constitutional Convention. And because he does, a lot more delegates show up, and it's a much more significant convention. Even though Washington doesn't talk too much, just the fact that he's presiding over it added such legitimacy to the convention, and particularly the part when they're talking about the new executive branch and the presidency. It was pretty easy to imagine how the presidency would look. All you had to do was look up at the chair of the man who's heading the convention, and you can see right there that that's going to be our first president.
Yeah, the second part of Mike's question was if Washington hadn't stepped up, who would have filled those shoes? And it sounds like the answer might be, like, we can't tell. There's no way to really be sure, but it might be that there really wasn't anybody else. They needed Washington. But again, I'm going to encourage you all to go to the session with Alexis Coe tomorrow. You can find that link at constitutioncenter.org. It's going to be a great chat. She's really knowledgeable about all things Washington. And so she and Jeff should have a fantastic conversation. I think, we're pretty much wrapping up here. We've got about 5 minutes left, so please get your questions in if you have not already. And in the meantime, Kev, any other stories that you want to share?
Sure. So again, I guess we'll say going back to the Constitutional Convention, sort of us wrapping up with Constitution Day. One artifact, I just mentioned the story of George Washington sitting in his chair. And you can still go and see that chair today. And the chair that you may have heard the story before, but on the back of the chair, there is a half sun, sort of like half of the sun. And the other famous figure who attended the convention and really added legitimacy to it was Philadelphia's favorite citizen, Dr. Benjamin Franklin. And Franklin, again, like Washington, didn't really say much during the convention. But at the end of it, as people are debating about whether or not they're going to sign, Franklin makes a remark that, during the whole convention, he had looked at the chair and the sun on Washington's chair without being able to tell whether it was a rising sun or a setting sun. But he was now certain, with the signing of this new Constitution, that it was indeed a rising and not a setting sun. So that's a story that we've heard perhaps before, but it's always a fitting one for the closing of Constitution Day.
And fun fact about the Constitution Center, if not the Constitution, is that our company softball team is named the Rising Suns in honor of that story. So you can come to our games and cheer us when we can play softball again. Question from Lainey, while we're on the topic of Washington, how old was he when he signed the Constitution?
He was 55 years old. So Washington was born in February of 1732. He was 55 at the time of the convention, and he was 57 when he becomes president. A lot of the founding fathers actually lived well above average life expectancy. So you may have heard the video we did earlier today. Benjamin Franklin at the time of the signing was 81 years old. Franklin, Samuel Adams, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, all lived into their 80s, and John Adams lived to be 90. So many of the founding fathers lived well above average life expectancy, even for that era. And you may have heard this story as well, that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both passed away on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary to the day of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, so great to have all of these questions about George Washington when we have an expert coming tomorrow. It's so very timely for her to answer all of these questions. All right, well, I think that wraps it up for today. So thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Happy Constitution Day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone. Happy Constitution Day. All of our sessions today are recorded, and so they'll be posted on our YouTube channel. I mentioned our Alexis Co-program tomorrow, but that is just one of a whole year-long scholar exchange programs that we'll be doing. So all of those are available on constitutioncenter.org. You can take classes in every topic of the Constitution. We're going to be doing ratification next week, federalism after that, and then in October, we're really diving into the elections. So please keep, those sessions are on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Jeff Rosen, our amazing president and CEO, who is an expert in all things Constitution, and our Chief Learning Officer, Curry Sautner, plus Tom and Nick. So please join those sessions and check out our website. We have tons of great information to answer all of your questions and more. But for now, thank you for joining us and have a very happy Constitution Day. Bye, everybody.